infrastructure development in their state. And I think it's a veritable topic we're going to be dealing with, the effect that which they are concerned about. Your Excellency, you once again welcome. Please can we return back to our seats? High-level business dialogue 1, exploring investment opportunities of aviation infrastructure. Let me invite, as one of the discussant, in no particular order, Dr. Charles E. Slumberjay, Lead Air Transport Specialist, World Bank Group. A warm round of applause for him. Let me equally invite Mr. Icao Zebedee, Advisor to the Board of Directors, Staff Airports Holding. Representative on the Council of Icao from Spain, Mr. Victor Manuel Aguado. A warm round of applause for him. Mr. Alawani will need to compare notes with you, please. Mr. Alawani, if he's around. Yes.
So you can add them?
Yeah.
So you're taking the questions on them?
Yeah, okay. I'll put the questions.
Just add all of them so we don't change it. Can I add the ammonia?
We have to invite. They cannot stay again for the first group.
No problem.
So,
what's the... Start with these three first. Is that not what I told you?
We have different people on the stage. Who have we got on the stage right now? It's in sections, you see. Thank you.
I'm so sorry. Just when I apologize to you. Alexander and Junior are my station. They will call you guys against the how many groups?
Oh dear, this is fun.
But the theme is the same, or is it?
Yeah, exploring investment opportunities. Yeah. Okay. Okay. We're going to fly with that. Okay, shall I start with just
So
start with it too? Okay.
So you flow from here.
All right.
It's a dialogue section, so divide the three, just flow.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. We're going to have a high-level dialogue, a free-flowing discussion on the topic of, which Victor has appraised you of, exploring investment opportunities of aviation infrastructure. We already have on the stage from the World Bank Group, Dr. Charles E. Schlumberger. Please give him a round of applause. Welcome. And I would like to invite onto the stage His Excellency Mr. Akram Termpatea Paysith. Come and join us, please. Thank you. And Mr. Yan Pei, if you're still here with us, we'd love to have your company. Thank you very much. A round of applause to welcome him, please. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, I'm going to start with Your Excellency, Mr. Termpatea Paysith. As we all know, aviation infrastructure projects usually require a long time frame from planning to completion. So that's facing long-term uncertainty in terms of investment. How can we support and encourage investments in aviation infrastructure?
Well, I think in our case in Thailand, so many mega projects were delayed actually mainly because of the changing of the government. And even though you have the very good planning, but it takes time. When government changes, sometimes they change the policy. But in many cases also that the investment project always continue no matter the government change. For example, when we're talking about in the aviation sector, the Suvarnabhumi Airport, which is our main international airport right now. Actually, it was planned more than 30-40 years, but implementation is very important because it needed the big investment and the courage of the government, the commitment government to invest. Because of the long return and the financing. I think the financing is not the problem, but the continuation of the policy is more important. Right now, there are so many projects have been delayed as well. So within our government, I mean the current administration, all the mega projects are undergoing at this moment. So we can see that when you're talking about the traffic congestions in Bangkok, what we need is the 10 metro lines in Bangkok. So far, during the past government, we could do only two or three. But right now, we are almost complete the decision to approve all the the metro lines in Bangkok, and you will see that the construction will start there. Actually, some of them are already start. We will see the output in the next 3 or 4 years, or even 5 years. The extension of the Suvarnabhumi airport, also when we finish in 2004, it is open in 2006, and suddenly the capacity was full, because our capacity at the time was the 45 million passengers per year. But once it opened, then we had to receive up to 50 and 55. So planning for the second, the extension of the airport was a little bit slower. But anyway, it's now under construction already. So I think it's all depend on the government and policy maker. Once we decide this project is feasible, then you need the courage to find financing. I think financing is not the problem for Thailand. Basically, the construction, for example, the airport, totally invested by the government, by the foreign loan, and it's not difficult to find financier to finance this project.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for that insight into what's happening in Thailand, in Bangkok. So it required quite a bit of courage on the part of the state and a commitment as well over that long-term period. If I can turn to Mr. Pai, from the manufacturer's point of view, what can be done to support and encourage investments in aviation and infrastructure?
Thank you for the question. I think investment, generally speaking, is not a big difference between the investments for the decision to make an investment for the average person on the street versus a company, business, or even a state. It's all about whether you can or you cannot see the return on investment, and whether you can see that clearly and whether it lies in a time frame that you can accept. So we have, in this perspective, I think, a huge communication task to start with. Is the return on investment really visible? And from that perspective, I think this, again, aviation benefits report is really a key. So we need to do much more in terms of communication towards in that aspect. And I think when it comes to who is then the most difficult one to convince for investments, I think, as you know, in research projects and so on, industry is always participating in the project as well and putting up its own money. So I think the problems or the challenges are really to find the state investments, to keep the states up and going when it comes to investments. And there I think we need to reach out broader than the aviation community. We need to talk to ministers from different departments. We need to talk to the development, infrastructure, finance, and so on, because this is often where investments are sort of challenged towards other investments in other sectors, shorter cycles, easier to see return on investment, and so on. And in this sector in particular, I think it's such a complex environment as well, where it doesn't make sense for anybody to go with their own investments. You need to have the comprehensive approach, which makes it even more difficult. So from that perspective, I think that one of the keys to success in this one would be to have a long-term vision, to have all the stakeholders on board, to have the comprehensive approach where everybody is committing, because everybody sees what's in it for us at the end of the day. And there would have to be the increased traveling and the benefits that that brings, that is sort of visible for everyone. Then you can, from that, you could come back and analyze what's the return on investment for all the different stakeholders, and then you could commit. So it's a huge communication task, and I think that there are some good examples you can look at. And if I could just mention one, I think the CSAR program that has been ongoing in Europe, the Single European Sky Aviation Research Program, already shows a return on investment by 6 to 1. So every euro invested for every stakeholder in average is creating 6 euros back. I think when this is visible, good examples is also helpful.
That's excellent, Mr. P. Some really key points in there about ROI, return on investment, starting with some good communication Let's not forget that, to get the message across and to keep that process going with all stakeholders. Thank you very much for that synopsis. Moving on to Dr. Schlumberger, question for you. What are the criteria to be considered in identifying infrastructure needs and priorities in specific states and regions?
Thank you very much. That's a very good question, and I listened very well when I heard about the challenges in Thailand. How do we get to 45 to 50 million with one or two airports in the capital, right timing and all that? If we focus on Africa, the problem here I often see is that the scale is so small that we are not realistic. If we have a city airport have served for many, many years with 250,000 passengers a year, 250,000. It's now growing, it's now 400,000. They are building a new airport outside the city. Now they need 200 million for a huge new terminal that can take a couple of millions. Then I think the sequencing is off. Because if you need to finance that, just the 200 million for the terminal, you will have to put $40 or $50 in addition to all the charges you already have on the ticket. And it's just not payable. Which are the best airports? They're in America and the United States. Those who have traveled to the United States, with some exceptions like National Airport, these are terrible buildings. They are ugly. They are wide, they are functional, but there's no luxury in it. Millions of people go through. The cost per passenger is extremely low. No developing country would like to build such a crappy 1950, 1960 building that is progressively enhanced and they add something here. It's always cost effective. And I think that is often missing. So if we look at infrastructure needs, we can look at the IATA manual, how many square meters we need per passenger. We can look at traffic projections. But very often I come to the conclusion, your airport is bigger than the one where I come from, Basel-Mulhouse, with 7 million passengers. And you have 1.4 million passengers, and now you build a new airport for nearly $1 billion? Who should pay that? So the answer is, first, make your homework and calculate what makes financially sense. And that's then the question. We don't want infrastructure development. Nobody's in the business to do infrastructure development. We want to develop aviation services to support economic development. And why is Africa the only state, the only continent where the airlines only lose money? And one airline coming and going with some exceptions. Because it's always over-dimensioned for the market. You don't do the small step, you want to do the big step. So in infrastructure, we need to start with the small step and adjust the needs and maybe just add an additional building to the existing old airport, and that's already enough for the next 5 years, and then we add another one.
Dr. Schlumberger, thank you very much for that. Yes. So a question of quality and scale and some very dodgy airports in the US, which I think some of us have experienced. And it's all with the aim of supporting economic development. Mr. Bray, I wonder if I could have your insight on this same topic. Criteria to be considered in identifying infrastructure needs and priorities in specific states and regions.
So I could just add, I totally agree with what has been said already. I could just add that it's very difficult from my perspective to exactly point out which kind of criteria, but it comes back to a number of things as well that is already mentioned. Return on investment would have to be there, so we would have to see what's in it for us from a financial or economic or growth perspective. Having said that, when you identify, and then it depends on where you are, so what's your starting point, which would be maybe one starting point in Africa, another starting point in the southeast or in Europe or in US, depending on where we are. But I think there are a number of key elements that could be outlined anyway or commented anyway. I think first of all, safety has been mentioned before. Safety is, in my view, the license to exist for the whole industry. So I think we must never lose track on safety. And if there is a safety issue compared in Africa, for example, with the rest of the world, I think it needs to be addressed immediately. I think as well that when we talk about the growth that we are foreseeing, the doubling of the fleet, which by the way could be much bigger than that, because the doubling of the fleet is forecasted with the businesses as we know today, with new entrants, with drones and so on. There could come totally new needs as well, and things that has not been possible to do in the past will be possible to do in the future. So we could speak about more than a doubling of the fleet. But with that kind of forecast, I think we have another task to live up to, and that's the environmental footprint. I think to keep the environmental footprint under control and actually reduce emissions is a license to grow. So I think with Africa's forecast, to exemplify again in terms of the demographic development and the population in Africa and so on, and the growth of GDP, I think this is already an area that would be extremely interesting to be in the lead of how do you deal with greener aviation. And greener aviation, that happens to go hand in hand with ATM systems as well. So ATM systems and digitalization is actually something that helps you be more efficient going from A to B. We often think that greener aviation is about more effective engines, about lighter frames, about new materials and constructions, and this is true, it is. Every new generation of an aircraft is roughly around 15 to 20% more effective than the past one, but this is not the only thing. It's about as well to when an aircraft has reached its destination, to get it down, to get it on the ground, and not having it circulating in the air because you were not able to plan correctly. So there's a lot to be gained in efficient air traffic management systems. From that perspective, I think if there are two areas that I think has a very strategic interest or impact for the future growth, ATM comes along with cybersecurity challenge and greener aviation in general. Without those two licenses, you won't be able to fulfill the market forecast anyway.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Perry. And that's an environmental view on the issue. Do you have anything to add, Your Excellency Tempataya Pasif? Do you want to add anything to that point?
Well, I think what you just mentioned is correct. Actually, all these infrastructure are basically by the government. So the government has to take care of all necessary condition before we go to the bank, actually. And especially to the international banking, for example, the World Bank or for the ADB. They need all the requirement, not only the feasibility of the project, as well as the environment, as well as the safety and security measure, because one of the things that we are facing and which we have already solved is our country was listed on the SSC before, 2 years ago. So I think now the people start to aware of this kind of the condition or factor that they never thought before. So as one of our discussion mentioned about the market condition, sometimes our projection of the demand when we did the forecast 10 or 20 years ago, but now the capacity that we plan already exceeded the demand is already exceeded our capacity. So in many cases, when we look at our mega project or infrastructure planning, particularly in the airport, particularly for the past 3 years, our demand far beyond our capacity. Not only the airport in Bangkok. Actually, we have two airports, Suvarnabhumi Airport and Don Mueang Airport. Don Mueang Airport was not used for a few years after we moved to the new airport. That was the mistake, because we planned at the first time that the Suvarnabhumi Airport will be what we call it the single airport. But people misunderstood. A single airport can be two airports running parallelly. So you separate between the international and the domestic airport. So that you can make use of the two airports. And we left the Dongmueang, the old airport, unused for a few years, and we lost money. Okay.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. So another paradox there, a single airport, but two airports. Yeah. I wonder if we can take a couple of questions from the floor. We're trying to keep to time. Yes, gentleman at the front here. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Hajime Yoshimura, Icao, President of Icao Air Navigation Commission, and thank you very much for your hospitality and conversations. So I'm summarize my thought. So first, why Icao is here today is we would like to improve safety, efficiency, security, and environment for all contracting states. We call no country left behind. In order to this, we also would like to facilitate implementation of Icao SAP standard and recommendations. And if I consider the states, I believe states also would like to secure the safety for their nations, as well as they would like to be developed and also invested and flourished. However, I see many states are struggling how to increase the investment and struggling what to do first. And I saw investors like World Bank or commercial bank or private sector would like to find good investment places with high return of investment. But however, as you mentioned, the presenter said that safety in the states may affect the business model, and also like a minister of Thailand said that the SSC, if state receive SSC, it also affects the business of airlines in the state. So I understand that why aviation has less investment so far is aviation is fragmented, well affected by many factors like disease, pandemic or financial crisis or war, but actually the Icao produced 12,000 SAPs. It includes hardware and also software, human performance and procedure. So my comments and my questions, or maybe comments, is that we talk about the criteria or fundamental indicators for state need to pursue. So one of indicator could be the implementation of Icao standard, because Icao standards will secure safety, efficiency, security, and environment. So this, if the state implements those factors, it will improve the stability of the state who accept, welcome the investment from the
commercial. That's a very long question. You've got yourself in there. Does anyone want to answer that in a nutshell? Mr. Schlumberger.
Thank you. 15 years ago, when we started concentrating on aviation in Africa, we start with safety and security. And we have come a long way. As an aviator, I can tell you there are two elements that are important. One is safety oversight by the regulator. Okay? We can have all the standards implemented, but if the regulator doesn't oversee it, it's nothing. It's like you can't drink and drive, but the police doesn't stop you. That has improved. That is important. The other element that we sort of ignore for the moment is look at the fleet today. Airbuses and Boeings, that won't stall, that won't fly into terrain if it's on autopilot. These are airplanes that are completely new and have the latest safety technology. So from that perspective, we also had an improvement. And the third one is air navigation. Most airports had no approaches or an NDB that didn't work. Today, with very little money, we can do RNAV approaches on the GPS system, so we can at least approach the airport in bad weather and find it, and not fly into a mountain. These three elements were key. But just saying we need to implement Icao SOPs and have regulations and publish them and then think safety improves is probably not sufficient, but it's necessary for oversight.
Thank you very much. Now, I wonder if I can just give a round of applause to our discussants for this stage.
Could I do a commercial announcement? I am really pleased how many people are still here so late. So, from the World Bank and the IDB, you just won a little bonus, a little add-on. It's like after a good movie, you have a trailer. We have actually started a little initiative, a little approach to aviation development in Africa. And we are looking at 5 different sectors together with ECOWAS, and we have started one study and have today some interesting findings on fee and taxes. So for those who want to know what we are doing and how we really approach the sector in terms of development, and to get some first insights at the end of this session, just stay seated. We refuel 5 minutes, and off we are for a short and fascinating session. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's the advertisement out the way. Okay, changing gear. I would like... Yes? You need 30 seconds. Absolutely, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to respond to your comment. I think safety and security imposed by the Icao is very important. Looking at the case of Thailand that we listed on the SSC 2 years ago, it had an impact to our aviation industry, because no matter how new your aircraft is, but you cannot fly because of the member country will not accept your the supervision of the safety and security. I think this is very important. Although you have the new aircraft, new technology, you have the good airport with automation, fully automation, but your regulatory body that you cannot impose, you cannot control, or you cannot supervise your operator, that's meaningless. So I just want to emphasize that we have to fully comply with the safety and security to make sure that the airlines and flying from your country is safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the panel. Can you please give them a round of applause as they make their way off the stage? Thank you very much. Next, I would like to invite onto the stage Mr. Victor Emmanuel Aguado, representative of the Council of Icao Spain, Mr. Alexander de Juniac, Director General, International Air Transport Association, and Mr. Muchili Mayura, Senior Transport Specialist of Islamic Development Bank Group. Please welcome them onto the stage. We're going to keep this one pretty sharpish, and I'm going to start with Mr. Aguado.
About the timing.
I'm being told here about timing, so I think, the message is across. We'll keep this tight. Based on your experience, why is it important for states to invest in aviation, and how do we convince financial institutions and investors to invest in aviation?
Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here in Abuja, in the heart of Europe, of Africa, excuse me. Of Africa. I have a problem with the schedule. Well, I promised that I was going to speak in Spanish today, but for the purpose of being a little bit more interactive, I will do it in English. First of all, we have learned a lot of things along the day And there are certain issues that have been already mentioned, and they are very important for the question you have asked. First of all, I think we have to understand the aviation system as a wide, complex ecosystem. So that's very wide. And why I'm saying this, because I will come back to this issue. It is not only airlines and their services, it is not airports and their services, but it is also the institutional architecture of the aviation in each state. It is the regulator not only on safety oversight, but also on economic oversight. But it's also air navigation services. Air navigation services that it is not only traffic management, it's communication, it's navigation, it's surveillance. And there are many other services that there had to be implemented in order to have the aviation system in line, to have a real aviation system. So first of all, states, investors, they have to understand that this is a wide and complex system, and we have to tackle each of the elements on the system. Second, we have heard about economics, the business case. Yes, there has to be a business case for any investment, but how do we put value to the impact of aviation in higher education? How do we put value of aviation on the health policy? How do we put value of aviation in response to crisis? How do we put value to the high-skilled jobs? And how do we put value to the territorial integration of a particular state? So things go beyond a typical business case. And that's why it is so important, the private and public interaction, and the public and private investment monitoring and understanding. And I would say the third thing is that indeed we need to address the national issues on the aviation system of a state. But sometimes we don't need national solutions. And there has been a debate before, do we need an airline in each state, flag airline? But it is the same thing with many other services around the aviation system. And I'm referring, for example, communications. We have communications via satellite. We don't need a specific communication system in a particular state. In surveillance, we are going to have ADS-B based on satellites. Do we need a national approach to ADS-B based on satellites? No, we are going to have one constellation. About navigation, we have GPS and many other constellations. We don't need each state to develop a GPS in the world. But the same thing goes to, for example, aeronautical information, it goes to accident investigation, it goes to even oversight. Recently, it was mentioned, implementation of SARPs. Very important, the oversight. Cannot we share this at the regional or sub-regional scale? Cannot we develop sub-regional schemes that provides an efficient way to address all those matters? So what I'm saying is that all that has to be contemplated from a national perspective and also from a private perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aguado. We've got a number of issues there, communication, sharing. We heard earlier about hubs. So it's on a similar theme. I wonder if Mr. De Junior, can we have your opinion on this?
Look, we believe that, well, first of all, even if it's an ecosystem, you have different parts in the aviation business. Some of them are attractive for investors. Airports are attractive for investors, for instance, because they generate a lot of profits. And for 50 years, airlines, have been a black hole for investors. It was a drama to invest in airlines. There are famous stories about Warren Buffett and Richard Branson speaking about airlines. For 5 or 6 years now, the airlines have started to do a good job. We are making money. It's a historical exception in 70 years of existence, and you must know that. But we are making money now regularly. So in terms of business case, airlines have become a better case. Anyway, we think, and I tried to say that this morning, that if we want to invest in the aviation sector, because it generates a lot of external effects that my neighbor has mentioned, that are difficult to quantify. And because it is a public good in many areas, an airport is a public good. Because the public authority owns the land, usually. They have to plan in long term. The slots are public good in an airport, but we think. You have to find the right combination between the public and the private sector. And that's a difficult issue. Because you have to be very attractive to attract private money, but you must keep the public interest in control, or in the picture, because they have a big responsibility, and they cannot avoid this responsibility. Never. When a state starts to withdraw from an airport or from aviation, it declines, because it's a key asset and it's a public asset. And then you have the regulation process that has to give the right balance between public and private. The private has to be rewarded, but not at a level in which it's not affordable for the guys who pay, and the guys who pay, it's us, the airlines. So we say find the right balance, and it's not easy.
Thank you, Mr. de Juniac. So it's about striking that balance between private and the public and regulation. Yeah, thank you. Mr. Muia, can we have your view on this, please?
From a development bank perspective, I think the role of the state in the aviation industry is quite important because, as colleagues to my right has already mentioned, there is a significant impact in the general economy. And we are in the business of development, which means we generally do not look at the aviation industry with any particular priority. We try to look at it as a sector that contributes to the development of a nation. And in that respect, it is quite important for government to put together a comprehensive integrated national transport strategy through which we could see how the aviation industry is contributing to the overall development of the country and its impact. These as well, we know that civil aviation, particularly airports, have quite a big impact on the environment, the social and environmental impact that arises from the aviation industry. And generally, there are quite a significant number of people that get affected when these infrastructures are built. And we generally require the state to come in to address this particular issue, to see that the people who are going to be affected by this investment are relocated, and how these the environmental impact is managed in the long run. So states do have a role to play in that aspect to mitigate the overall social and environmental impact of civil aviation infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muia. So again, it's about people and social environmental impact. We mustn't forget about that. I wonder if I can accelerate matters. Can we take some questions from the floor? Just a couple, short ones, if we may. Anyone have any thoughts or opinions? You've stunned them all. Yeah? One question from the front here? Did I see a hand go up? All quiet on the Western Front. Okay, I think it's that time of the afternoon. Can I ask you to please give a round of applause to our panelists who've done exceptionally well this afternoon. Thank you to all of you.
So we're going to Q1.
Okay.
Q1. Is it next? We've done Q1, Q2.
We've done Q1.
We're going to Q3.
Okay.
Let me come in here.
All right, you go in.
A warm round of applause for them again, please. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, for the next session, allow me welcome Mr. Jeff Paul, Director General, Civil Aviation Navigation Services Organization. A warm round of applause for him. Allow me to invite Mr. Philippe Brown, Head of Dakar Office of the European Investment Bank, to join him. Let me invite Mr. Matthew Pella, Director of West African Meridium. Call in, please.
Just two. Ah, you're in a special group here. Right, where are we? Okay, the first question is going to be for Mr. Poole. Why is it important for states to invest in aviation? And how do we convince financial institutions and investors to invest in aviation?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to be apparently controversial, but I'll explain my comments.
Oh, please do.
I don't actually believe it is important for states to invest in aviation when we're talking financially. The role of states should be to ensure that aviation is financeable, however that's done. In some cultures and regions, that will require government funding, but in many cases, there's an opportunity to use the market and the financial institutions. To come to the second part of your question. So I think that's important to understand, because what we have to put right in the aviation industry is to make it operate like a normal business so that it can attract finance from whatever source. And your question was, how do we convince financial institutions and investors to invest in aviation? Well, I think it's the other way around. We actually should address their requirements, which means that we need to provide certainty for what is a long-term industry, so that there's stability for the investment. People know what the projects are, what the outputs and deliverables are expected, and so that we run our business as a business, whether that's on the aircraft side, the ATM side, or the airport side. We do have an amazing industry that does amazing things, and in my view, it is absolutely financeable. But we have to create the environment to do that. Aviation has grown up organically over the years, and is therefore quite distorted and fragmented and unusual in its nature compared to many of the other international projects that are financed. And we just have to ease back into a more normal environment, in my view, so that aviation has a compelling investment case.
Thank you for that. And your opinion, Mr. Brown, invest in a business as a business?
I think one of the important aspects is very good planning. Strategic airport master planning is crucial, that should also be incorporated in the national transport policies. Building airports without other associated transport investments is not a good idea. It has to be integrated. And all of this, if it's coherent and right-sized, then it will attract, by definition, the financiers.
And moving on, Matthew Pellier.
Yeah, I think the aviation infrastructure has the chance actually to be in itself potentially a profitable industry. So it has been said earlier by Mr. Degenel that there is actually the possibility to make profitable investments in airports. That's not the case of public transport. That's certainly not the case of rail or not always of road infrastructure. So in itself, the airports can be profitable, provided, of course, that the rules and the policies are well defined, either by the regulations or by the contract, which are defining the relationships between the private and the public sector. So that there is a good business case at the beginning, and then that there is just the need, and of course it's a challenge because there are various different interests, various stakeholders. So there's just the need to define the right regulations and contract. But in itself, that's really a profitable industry, provided that you can invest in them, because of course there is volatility. You can have drop in the number of passengers. You can have serious issues, but probably that you are investing in the long term, that's some investment.
Thank you for that. And just to probe a little deeper here, maybe Mr. Paul, how would you identify the source for growth, potential returns? Where's the best source? Where should we be looking in the industry?
The source for growth, I'm not sure that I understand the question particularly.
The source for growth for potential returns.
Okay. Well, I think we're used to being in a growth industry, and the challenge is that let's hope that continues. By the way, but the challenge is how we meet that growth, and I think all of the previous questions relate to that, which is we have to create successful programs that are well managed and deliver against the expectation of investors, but are also delivering against the expectations of states in terms of providing the economic benefits and social benefits that we all know come from aviation. So the indicators can be as broad as the nation's GDP and the contribution that aviation makes to that, or it can be the amount of traffic growth, the amount of capacity that's put in place, or perhaps the financial returns on the investments. Depends on which stakeholder you're talking about, I think, as to what indicators they would regard as the successful ones.
And we're talking about management as well, of infrastructure.
Yeah, and I think, again, this is, aviation is complex and different from many things, but the same principles, the same principles should apply when we're talking about managing successful industry, a successful business. So you've got to have an organizational and institutional and regulatory framework that supports best practice and performance. So you need to set up the organization that is capable and is managed on a performance-based approach, and a very simple, understandable regulatory framework that goes around that, but that continues to ensure safety and delivery of aviation.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that insight. I wonder if I could move to Mr. Brown now, as to whether you could share any examples of successful business cases for aviation-related projects.
In the African context?
Yeah, that would be great.
As I alluded to in previous discussions, we financed a number of projects in Africa, most recently in Lilongwe and Blantyre, in Maputo, in 5 airports in Tanzania. We are very much demand driven, so we have to be approached with a good business case for financing the sector, and then we will look at that. Mostly it's infrastructure, it's not for purchase of aircraft. One of the things in particular in Africa, there is a strong tendency for national airlines consolidating and making it more competitive is certainly probably the way to go. That's what's happening elsewhere, and that they need to group together to consolidate.
Seems to be a theme of the afternoon, get together to make this thing fly. Excuse the pun. Mr. Pelle, any thoughts about that? About examples that you can think of? Good practice.
I think I mentioned it earlier. I think the Madagascar airports that we closed actually earlier this year, I think is really a good example of a successful project financing, at least the project financing, and then hopefully the concession life will be as successful. That's starting. So we have been able to structure project finance without any kind of public subsidy, without any kind of recourse towards the shareholders or the contractors, in order to take the concession of the two main airports of Madagascar, build a new international terminal, and actually attract 210 million euros of financing, long-term financing in the country. So I think it is a major achievement, and I think that it is clearly showing the path for other projects. And I mean, provided that you have a client which has the willingness to do the project, which has the relevant planning, and that is ready to progressively adapt the regulation and have a contract that enables the private sector to do the investment. There is, of course, a huge appetite from both the private sector, the DFIs, and the commercial sector to invest into this kind of airports in Africa.
Thank you very much. So rigorous planning, approaching a business as a business, and the benefits to come. Thank you very much. Can we give a round of applause for this rather tight and insightful session? You can stay if you want. We're going to have more invited to the party. Yeah? Okay. I'd like to next invite onto the stage His Excellency Mr. Jitendra Narayan Dev, Minister for Culture, Tourism and Civil Aviation from Nepal, Ms. Angela Gittins, Director General of Airports Council International, and Mr. Pierre Guzlain, Vice President of African Development Bank, and Mr. Hisham Zibedi, Advisor to the Board of Directors of TAV Airports Holding. Please give them a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Have we lost Angela? Oh, there's Angela. Fabulous. Good to see you. Yeah. Okay. Okay, can we start with Mr. Narayan Dev? And it's about the long-term nature and the time frame involved in planning to completion, facing this uncertainty in terms of aviation infrastructure. How can we encourage investment in the view of long-term, the long-term nature of this business? No answer? No.
No, I'm not.
Oh. Oh, all right. Well, who would like to answer that question?
Sorry about that.
One batch. Okay. Mr. Hisham? Yeah?
Sure.
Okay. Microphones. We'll get sorted eventually.
So the question, I guess, was around the uncertainty in the delivery of infrastructure projects and how one deals with that. And I think from our perspective as an operator of airports, the starting point is really the preparation that is made at the level of the government for the launch of these projects. I think a lot of projects have had twists and turns essentially because of lack of preparation. But the successful projects that we have seen are those where there's been extensive preparation by government, where there is a readiness by the authorities to launch the projects, that they understand what a PPP is, they are well advised, and usually when that is the case, the project comes to market, if you like, well structured, with a risk profile that is typically acceptable to investors, and therefore they are more likely to be successful and deliver the value for the economy that is being sought initially for the delivery of those projects. So preparation for me is absolutely the first point, and usually people say that, you know, there's an early period where there's limited investment in a project. We are of the view that it is essential that government invests significantly in a project, in its preparation, to minimize later costs of development because projects have not been put in place properly. Obviously, I will not go through the other aspects that are obvious: the appropriate risk profile, the appropriate legal and regulatory framework. All of those matters have been discussed. But if I was going to pinpoint one other point, is to install a dialogue which is more dense between authorities, lenders, and potential operators. I do find, and this is despite the crucial role that DFIs play in developing these projects, that there could be more done in that respect, and that financing institution can provide guidance, and they do, I know in a number of cases, but more systematically provide guidance so that the projects are structured correctly, and there should be dialogue with the operators so that what is put to market is likely to be well received.
Okay, thank you. So another plea for good communication.
And preparation.
And preparation. Thank you very much. I wonder if we could, well, just sensibly move the microphone onto Mr. Guzlin. The question for you was about, you know, the criteria to be considered in identifying infrastructure needs and priorities in specific states and regions. If you wanted to address that, that would be most helpful.
Very good. So we're a bank, we're a development bank, and so like other development banks, we tend to be responsive to client demand. So that's the first thing. We don't go out there looking for projects. I mean, we do contribute to shaping and articulating projects, but so client demand is the first driver. And so we would look at, of course, the business case, the business need. As I mentioned in a previous intervention, we often have requests for finding infrastructure or activities that might be over-dimensioned relative to the specific needs of the country or the sector at the time. So that's certainly one thing we would look at quite carefully. Another dimension, again maybe starting from the bigger picture, is the overall sector strategy and policy. Do we have a sound sector policy and strategy and regulatory framework? And again, it's again a theme that we've had throughout the day today, is how do we align the different pieces of the puzzle to make the whole thing happen. And so clearly if you have let's say an airport project in the context of a clear aviation strategy that is connected with a broader strategy for, you know, tourism and export of horticultural products or whatever it is, if you have a strong business kind of case around the need for this new infrastructure, if you have a strong business model as to how to develop, operate and run that infrastructure, and then you develop a credible framework to kind of give faith and and trust of investors in the ability of this project to repay and to return profit. So those are kind of core elements that you need to bring together. They're complex because they depend on a different number of stakeholders, both on the public side and the private sector side, but that makes complex projects quite powerful. I mean, and again, I would definitely agree that strong preparation up front is essential, focusing on the bigger picture and not just on financing of a specific asset is another important factor, and not something that is always well understood. We often have clients who are in a hurry, who want to have something that is maybe bigger than a neighbor has or something like that. And so finding a way to kind of create a minimum consensus among stakeholders around the approach of the project, the design of the project, and then providing the necessary guarantees and comfort that the government will be there and the public sector to support, enhance, and not interfere in project implementation.
Thank you very much for that. Can we move the mic down to Angela? And I'd like your opinion from an airport's point of view.
Well, I don't disagree with what I've already heard, but let me speak from the point of view of the owner. To add to what I said in an earlier intervention, the first thing is getting full use of the assets you already have, kind of sweating that asset, trying to be more efficient. These days, the technology can take you a long way. Look at changes in procedures and policies, again, working with governmental agencies on customs and immigrations and security, looking at the changes that are going through with respect to aerodrome design issues. So before you go to the bank, look at what you can do in the current asset. Secondly is look at what you need to do to protect the asset. And I say this to my African brethren to please learn from the ills of the developed world, where airports have been allowed to be enveloped by incompatible uses, and therefore you need to either find a new airport in a new place, or you have very, very expensive renovations and recapitalizations where you are because you're so hemmed in. So protect that asset with land use planning. It may seem you don't need it when you're in a not very densely populated area, but you will need it. Airports draw development, and so you want it to make sure it's compatible development, not incompatible development. You have to, as someone said earlier, future-proof your investment. Then you get down to the financing part, and I would divide that into two pieces. One, airports that are economically viable or have the potential to be economically viable, and then airports that have very little potential to be economically viable. We have found that on average, worldwide average, airports that serve fewer than 1 million passengers have a hard time making a profit, even breaking even, have no return on investment. So what in many places have done, if they're able to, is use a network approach where they cross-subsidize the smaller airports with the larger airports. We see it done very successfully in lots of places, Mexico being one of the early ones to do that. If it is economically viable, then I go to what these gentlemen have said, the proper planning, both the design, both the aerodrome and airport design, as well as the larger context of what you're trying to achieve with your asset. Communication, transparency with stakeholders, includes the airlines, and also includes the communities. No one should be surprised after a PPP or a privatization. They may or may not like what your plan is, but they shouldn't be surprised at the end, oh my gosh, charges are going up. Oh my gosh, passenger fees are going up. They should know that in the beginning, and the owner needs to take the time to go through that process. Labor needs to know what's going to happen to them in the process. That's got to be worked through. You know, having a strike later, you know, is not a lot of fun. What the regulatory scheme is going to be. It's not only important to the investor, but extremely important to the operator, as well as to the airlines and the other users, you know, the true end user, the passengers and the shippers. So those would be some criteria that I would use from the airport perspective.
Thank you very much, Angela. So some insights there. Shore up your assets first, and keep that good communication going and be transparent. Now, we're coming up to time to wind up, so we've just got time for just a couple of quick questions from the floor. Does anyone have a burning question for the panel? This is your opportunity. They're flagging. They want cups of tea or jollof rice. I don't know. Appeal once more. We haven't heard from the women very much, as was mentioned earlier today. Your last chance. Any more questions for the panel before we close? No, they're questioned out. Thank you very much indeed. You've done an excellent job. Can we please give them a round of applause?
Your Excellencies, dear delegates, we have the field in sight. With your permission, can we land the plane for the day? If you agree, say aye. If you do not agree, say nay. The ayes have it. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a long day, quite fulfilling, reaching out for us. A whole lot of stuff for introspection. At this juncture, you permit us to sign off for the day officially and to very graciously remind us that there will be a gala night hosted by the Nigerian government for 7 p.m.-ish, just at the foyer here. The more you come, the merrier we'll be. Please can we rise to close. Thank you very much. And for Pauline Blunt, a warm round of applause for her. She's done creditably well. The pilot in command. My name is Victor Elias, and if you want some camera shots with panelists and discussants, please join them.
We'll have a special session, ADB, ECOWAS, World Bank right now.
World Bank, ADB, African Development Bank, and other teams are having their session now. Please, you are all invited. You can extend down if you don't mind. A warm round of applause if you can still endure to listen to this wonderful team, World Bank, African Development Bank, having some very few minutes with us on another discussion. But thank you for coming. We'll resume here after the gala night for 7 p.m. We'll be here for 9:30 a.m. tomorrow for another very rich day. God bless you. Enjoy the Nigerian hospitality.
Event coming on?
Yes. So in 5 minutes we'll start this very special session, ECOWAS, African Development Bank,